Rudolph Munch, Karl Kenberger, Teresa Teufel, and many, many before them. They served under Maria Teresa, Kaiser Franz Joseph, and Kaiserin Elizabeth. The Kaiser would enter the room to the sound of fanfares. A much sought-after workplace.
It was a hive of activity.
With a lot of competition and pressure to perform.
The selection process was very strict.
A life with highs, he was respected, highly respected. And lows. They received medals and gifts, but also punishments, and they had to handle the extravagancies of their rulers. Some ended up in the dungeons, and some even took their own lives. The health of the monarchy was in their hands.
At the Congress of Vienna, not only did they eat an awful lot, but they drank a lot too.
They were at the heart of the pomp and glamour of banquets, weddings, coronation celebrations, court balls, and state receptions. Austrian heritage, the Habsburgs chefs. Royal Habsburg daily life seen through the lens of their eating habits. The table manners of Kaiser Charles VI, for example, resembled those of a peasant. The church actually condemned the fork as a tool of the devil. But his 16-course menu was naturally a little more lavish than that of his subjects.
To start, capon with cabbage, veal and roasted heron with mushroom soup. Then eel pate, boiled crane, a platter of birds with salad and pig's ear. For dessert, fruit, grapes and French toast.
Other Habsburgs were less demanding, but still had the court kitchen working hard. What, for example, is the story behind the legend that Kaiser Franz Joseph's guests often had to go home hungry? That would have been very improper. The great ruler Maria Teresa forced her children to eat vegetables, and Kaiser Franz even put the Crown Prince Ferdinand on a strict diet. A look at the Habsburg chefs gives us a glimpse behind the velvet curtains of imperial residences and the peculiarities of their royal inhabitants. Nothing could be hidden from the royal court kitchen, from the decadence of some monarchs to their religious devotions, their most personal likes and dislikes, and their strengths and weaknesses. Not only did the royal court chefs have to cook to the highest standard for the royals, but they also had to provide the entire court with a lunch and dinner service. The court kitchen was therefore also a staff canteen. In the Viennese court, up to 2,000 or 3,000 people had to be catered for, from stable boys and laundry maids to court officials and aristocrats in imperial service. Unlike in a canteen, however, there was no dining room for the staff and servants. The food was delivered directly to the workplace in cold heated boxes, known as Werkeln, and eaten in a quiet corner. It took 2 hours to deliver the food in the heated containers to the furthest corners of the court. Royalty had a choice of locations where they could eat their meals: private parlours, dining rooms and banqueting halls, depending on the occasion. The court chef or head chef did not spend his time chopping onions. It was a managerial post, and he was at the head of a highly specialized team. Of course, for the people of that time, being a court chef was a huge honor. It's hard to imagine today. There was an immense loyalty that a cook or confectioner had for their ruling house. It was always desirable for someone to be Roman Catholic. They were made to swear an oath because they knew it would be binding for the person that way. Why? Because as a cook, it would be easy to poison the royal family. so they wanted to make sure that wasn't an issue. A job position at court was considered to be secure, often held for life. So it's no wonder that the career was highly desirable. The caliber was high, and the hierarchical system was comprehensive, so there was a long potential career ladder. The prerequisites were 8 to 9 years of schooling, foreign languages, and excellent references from an aristocratic household, a top restaurant, or a grand hotel.
The selection process was very strict. You had to deliver high quality, and it wasn't easy because with the apprenticeships, as they existed back then, it took a very long time to really become very good. In some cases, people were brought in from abroad, from nearby countries of course, who were of a very high quality and who were also very well known throughout Europe.
There was a separate kitchen for each dish. Soup kitchen, roast kitchen, sauce kitchen, side dish kitchen, pastry kitchen, bakery, and so on. Each department level was also assigned a supervisor. Billing was calculated to the penny, and the court's financial office kept a close eye on the kitchens. There was a court Sir Gardener, who was responsible for the larder. The word Sir comes from Old High German and was already used in the Babenberg court. There was an accounting officer. There were, of course, personal chefs and head chefs. But there were also, of course, lower-ranking staff, such as kitchen maids, woodcutters, wood carriers, roast turners, and kettle drivers. The personal chefs were assigned to a certain royal and worked in small separate kitchens close to their own flat. They were responsible for making small meals and snacks, special requests, or nighttime treats. The previously mentioned Sir Gardener got their food from the Sir Garden, a vegetable garden, much like the one that once existed in St. Michael's Square in Vienna. Europe's longest-serving monarch, Kaiser Franz Joseph, was considered to be a frugal eater. There's a well-known story that the guests at court were never full, because after a few quick bites, the Kaiser would have the table cleared before anyone had even gotten food on their plates. That's not true, of course. Kaiser Franz Joseph was such an attentive person that he made sure this didn't happen, especially with guests. He always made sure that he only put his cutlery down when the last guest had finished eating. He considered it to be very important. It would have been very rude. One of the most respected employees of the court kitchen was the royal court chef, Karl Kenberger. As the son of a senior court confectioner, he was practically born into the Viennese Hofburg palace. His apprenticeship took place during the reign of kind-hearted Kaiser Ferdinand. He quickly rose to the top and, thanks to his multiple talents, was often taken with the Habsburgs when traveling. He was particularly famous for his pastries and entrees. During his 52 years of service, he was an excellent teacher to his young chefs and treated them like a father would treat his children. Kaiser Franz Joseph thanked him for his service with the Golden Merit Cross. One of the last royal court chefs was Rudolph Munch. The son of a hotelier couple, he learned his trade at the Hotel Imperial in Vienna under the French chefs Baffray and Laroche, and initially cooked at the Jockey Club for Baron Franchetti in Treviso, and in Berlin, Dresden, and Switzerland. Munch came to the Hofburg Palace in Vienna in 1887, where he was promoted to be a first-class court chef within just a few years, and served the royal couple Franz Joseph and Elizabeth. Anyone who might think that the ruler of a great empire was not concerned with such trivial matters as the kitchen menu would be mistaken. The Kaiser was presented with his own menu the day before his meals. He would look through it and cross out the courses he didn't want, and then, of course, they wouldn't be cooked. Both Franz Joseph and his wife Elizabeth, also known as Sisi, disliked large parties. an overabundance of food, rigid court etiquette, and a guest list that was drawn up according to strategy rather than personal preference meant the monarchs saw them more as a duty than a pleasure. Imperial overtime after a hard day's work. It also had a major impact on the court kitchen if their majesties had invited visitors instead of enjoying a quiet evening. The piece of smoked meat with brown bread, which would have normally been enough for the Kaiser's evening meal, was then, of course, out of the question. After all, they had to represent their country, and the bar was set quite high by international standards. The kitchens were put under the most pressure during court balls, because at court balls only the innermost people, so the royal family members and their closest confidants, could eat at the table. Everyone else had a buffet. One of the Habsburgs' last great chefs was Otto de Balmes. The Italian had French roots and came first to the court as an unpaid apprentice. After the loss of Italy, many people flocked to the remaining Habsburg territories and took any job they could get, even without pay. Otto was very skillful and entered the service of Crown Prince Rudolph when both were aged at around 18 years. By his early 30s, he was already a first-class court chef and was responsible for receptions, banquets and court balls. This is Otto de Balmes' work booklet, in which he recorded precise quantities of ingredients and cooking instructions for the court ball.
2 days before the ball, turtle soup, pastries with olives, ham mousse, a Madeira sauce, sauerkraut for the Atlantic cod, meringues, orange jelly, sponge cake, blackcurrant compote, confectionery. It took 5 days to set up the buffet, and less delicate dishes were therefore laid out in the hall well before guests arrived. The food on offer had to look impressive, as well as tasting delicious. It was a common task, too, for a court confectioner to skillfully recreate entire buildings from sugar paste, chocolate, or ice cream. The pressure on court chefs was immense. After all, the high aristocracy also travelled to other courts, had the highest expectations, and would quickly become bored. You sometimes heard criticism from outside, from travellers, that it looked very bourgeois, which meant really that it looked a bit shabby. Golden plates, crystal glasses from Lobmeyer, and delicacies from all over the world. To consider these things as shabby is, of course, a question of perspective. But it is no secret that the Habsburgs were usually short of money, at least by the standards of a ruling dynasty. The many wars in which they were involved over the centuries had a considerable impact on their finances, and they always had to economize. So much so, in fact, that the Kaiser's favorite dessert, Gugelhopf, a ring cake similar to bundt cake, had to be taken off the menu of daily desserts. They stopped making this Gugelhopf because they didn't dare tell the Kaiser that it was no longer available. A maid was sent ahead to deliver the message, but it didn't last long. The cutback of the Gugelhopf was only for a relatively short time, and then it returned again. Of course, we also suspect that this cutback didn't save a great deal of money in the end.
Over the course of his long reign, Kaiser Franz Joseph shaped the court economy with his needs and preferences, including, or especially, those of culinary nature.
Boiled beef is a dish particularly important to traditional Viennese cuisine. This is also due to the fact that in Vienna, beef is cut into many small individual pieces. This Viennese sectioning of meat is very different to international sectioning. This was done to make sure the animal could be optimally used. And last but not least, Kaiser Franz Joseph's great love of cooked beef made it very popular with the aristocracy and later also with the people.
Die große Liebe des Kaisers, Kaiser Franz Josefs, zum gekochten Rindfleisch, die es dann bei der Aristokratie und dann aber auch beim Volk sehr beliebt gemacht hat.
The preparation of the dish known today as Tafelspitz, boiled beef in broth served with a mix of minced apples and horseradish, must have been a court chef's specialty. After all, it was on the royal menu almost every day, whether as an intermediate course in a 10-course banquet or as the main course of a simple 4-course dinner. There were different types of events at the imperial court. There was the family dinner for all family members hosted by Kaiser Franz Joseph, which took place every Sunday. Everyone had to be present unless they were away or ill, and sometimes the Kaiser would even send his personal physician to check whether relatives were really ill or just faking it.
Zu kontrollieren, ob seine Verwandtschaft wirklich krank ist oder vielleicht ein bisschen schummelt und Krankheit nur vortäuscht.
Summer residences, country palaces and hunting estates show that the Habsburgs really did enjoy travelling a lot. From in the lower Austrian countryside to throughout the Austrian Empire, which stretched as far as the Adriatic Sea. In the court kitchen, the motto was travelling on business. The court cooks were taken along from Vienna. Naturally, those who could cook as many dishes as possible were favoured. There was actually a specialist for each dish, but those who were so multi-talented were also very popular to take on trips or to the residences, like the Kaiservilla in Bad Ischl. In Bad Ischl, Kaiser Franz Joseph liked to remain private, surrounding himself only with people he liked and who were close to him. The cooking there was somewhat less lavish. However, his wife, Katharina Elizabeth, was often noticeably absent from those intimate family dinners. She was known to enjoy travelling or taking extended holidays at her second, third and fourth residences, in Corfu, Switzerland, or Gütersloh Castle near Budapest. Sisi preferred everything compared to the Hofburg, Hermsvilla and Schönbrunn palaces in Vienna or Bad Ischl. And she also took her personal cooks with her, such as Karl Kenberg or Rudolph Munch. It is said that no chef lasted long in her service. There are many almost unbelievable rumours about Elizabeth. It is said over and over that she drank raw meat juice. She tried many diets, but raw meat juice was not one of them. That is a misunderstanding. Elizabeth would have meat loins pressed out with old duck presses, so they could use them for other purposes in the kitchen. Then this thick meat juice was boiled to make a sort of intense soup or consomme. That was how she ate it, as a nourishing, nutritious sort of hearty soup. She favoured lean meat, cabbage sprouts and asparagus, liked to take a dairy cow or goat with her when travelling for fresh milk, and sometimes ate only eggs or oranges. The royal court chef Teresa Teufel, the only female chef at this high rank, stayed with her demanding employer until the end. The formidable woman from the town of Scheibs in Lower Austria knew exactly what the Kaiserin liked and was an all-round chef who mastered all kinds of dishes, from baby porridge to roast venison and cream cakes. Elizabeth's favourite daughter, the Archduchess Marie Valerie, had already been cooked for by Miss Teufel in the so-called children's kitchen. And so after Elizabeth's death, she continued to cook for Marie Valerie, her husband and children. Kaiser Franz Joseph greatly appreciated invitations to his daughter's home and to his wife's holiday residences, not least due to Teresa Teufel's cooking skills. In 1891, he wrote to his wife,
"Thank you very much for the successful photograph of the excellent Tulf. The beautiful picture reminds me vividly of our cosy dinners and breakfasts in the Hellenberg Palace and of the good old days I spent with you in Gastein. What a meal! Teresa Tulf outdid herself. I ate all the dishes, and when I left the table, I didn't even feel like I had eaten.
During Elizabeth's lifetime, however, court's only female chef enjoyed catering exclusively for the Kaiserin from her small private kitchen. Despite her strict eating habits, Sisi had a weakness for sweet treats. Donuts, biscuits, rusks, brioche, chocolate, pastries and ice cream were her greatest temptations. However, the entire court loved ice cream. It was on the menu almost every day. This is an ice cream bomb from the royal confectioners. The tin is made entirely from pewter. The frozen stuff, an ice cream shell with a flavoured filling, was placed inside and then buried in ice. When it was completely frozen, it was plunged back into hot water. Decorations made from a different flavour of ice cream would then be placed around the bomb on the plate, and it would be covered. During one of his frequent visits to Vienna, the German Kaiser Wilhelm II was so impressed by the frozen white coffee from the court confectionery that he asked the Viennese head court confectioner for the recipe. The court chefs didn't just need a huge cold store for these ices, puddings and jellies, with venison, meat, fish and vegetables also needing space.
These cold stores were a solution that was used in many aristocratic houses and castles, but smaller communities also had ice cellars to keep supplies cold for the community. This involved a great deal of effort. In winter, the ice had to be transported from a nearby lake, or, here in the Hofburg, from the Danube.
They were always equipped for grand festivities. If necessary, the court's economic office would simply take on more staff. In 1867, a historic event was on the season's programme. The Austrian Empire became a dual monarchy, Austria-Hungary. After years of negotiations with the rebellious and brutally suppressed Hungarians, a reconciliatory gesture was needed. Franz Joseph and Elizabeth received the Hungarian royal crown. The court kitchen was once again challenged logistically, with the staff right at the centre of a turning point in European history. This was one of the biggest celebrations of the Habsburg monarchy under Kaiser Franz Joseph. The entire court was moved to Budapest, and everything was meticulously prepared for months on end. The coronation's festivities really did influence the entire life of the Habsburg monarchy for days and weeks, and of course it was also documented in all the newspapers. Ever since the monumental wedding of Joseph II, which surpassed the normal capabilities of court kitchens, they had managed to organize outsourcing well, and from then on they were able to take on extra staff for celebrations. In 1873, there was an event which needed additional staff, the Vienna World Fair, which took place in today's Prater Park. It was around the same time as the creation of Vienna's famous Ringstrasse buildings, a period of large-scale industrial development and economic heights. Habsburg wanted to score points internationally with this very expensive exposition and emphasized the powerful position of the dual monarchy. This included culinary highlights from the court kitchen for high-ranking foreign guests staying in the brand-new Imperial Hotel. On opening day, the Kaiser invited prominent figures including the Prince of Wales, the Prussian Crown Prince, and the Crown Prince of Denmark to the Hofburg Palace.
Menu from May 1st, 1873. Beef broth with vegetables, puff pastry with poultry mousseline, Viennese-style zander fish, boiled beef, stewed roast beef, braised capon, jellied foie gras, sorbet, roast venison, asparagus, fruitcake, English pudding, camembert, frozen pineapple, raspberries and chocolate, fruit and pastries.
On great occasions like these, ambitious chefs could earn prestige and climb the career ladder. But no one was immune to twists of fate. Otto de Balm, the much decorated and successful chef, had come into the service of the next heir to the throne a few years after the sudden death of his predecessor, Crown Prince Rudolph. However, he had a major career setback in 1901, when he was assigned to Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his household, and he did not get on at all with the Archduke. The Archduke and his wife, the Duchess of Hohenberg, were obviously very demanding when it came to food, but he wasn't supposed to spend any money on it. So this became a really terrible thing. It came before the disciplinary commission of the court, where he presented his side of the story and was, of course, punished. Because an archduke who complains, and is also heir to the throne, isn't going to lose. But the working conditions were really terrible. I have a written record of how the man had been maltreated that year. As I said, he was deprived of various financial benefits by the court, which hit him very hard. He had 5 children to look after. There have always been instances where the royals have been dissatisfied with their servants. In 1817, for example, the following complaint was written to the kitchen management.
The incessant complaints about inadequate service at the royal and high table have been raised repeatedly, especially in the last few weeks. Turns out that not only the preparation of the food, but also even the ingredients are subject to complaints that aside from the constant uniformity of the dishes, the table was filled with foul-smelling beef and wasted poultry, and sugar with an unpleasant flavour is used with the food.
Und Zucker mit widrigem Beigeschmack zu den Speisen verwendet wird.
On closer inspection, it turned out that the kitchen boys were sometimes assigned to cook, who were otherwise only responsible for menial tasks. The consequences.
The individuals at the Victualian magazine will be responsible for the quality of the food in future and must exercise better control, otherwise physical punishment is inevitable.
A beating was probably on the cards here. There was a 3-stage penalty system for court chefs. The first offence resulted in a reprimand, the second in a 1-week suspension, with the suspended chef having to pay his replacement's wages himself. On the third occasion, he would be threatened with dismissal. At the beginning of the 19th century, there was a unique major event in Vienna. The Vienna Congress was truly a turning point in the history of Europe. And for Vienna as an imperial metropolis, it was certainly one of the most outstanding events in Austrian history. After the fall and defeat of Napoleon, all the sovereigns gathered in Vienna to redivide and reorganize Europe. Delegations from dozens of countries stayed in Vienna for months. The otherwise frugal Kaiser Franz, who disliked pomp and splendor, invited thousands of delegates to banquets on a daily basis for months. At a grand banquet for 10,000 people, for example, 300 large hams, 1,100 chickens and capons, 100 hares and 12 wild boars were consumed in a single day, and that was only a small part of the buffet on offer. This was, of course, a huge challenge for the Viennese court. Several thousand people had to be accommodated and, above all, catered for in Vienna. And they not only had to be fed as usual, but also entertained. In other words, there were constant parties, gala dinners and balls. That's why they had to hire an incredible number of additional staff, and the court kitchen became unimaginably busy with the hustle and bustle of such a logistical masterpiece over those months. The guest list couldn't have been higher ranking. Princes, kings and kaisers wandered in and out of the banqueting halls, and the gossip columns also had plenty to report.
He loves for everyone, Alexander of Russia. He thinks for everyone, Frederick William of Prussia. He speaks for everyone, Frederick of Denmark. He drinks for everyone, Maximilian of Bavaria. He eats for everyone, Frederick Württemberg. He pays for everyone, Kaiser Franz. Kaiser Franz of all people. The otherwise frugal, austere Habsburg had to dig deep into his pockets for his role as host. The East German delegate Count Hans von Schlitz wrote in his diary, "The imperial court was told that each day of Congress cost 500,000 Austro-Hungarian gulden, and one of the regions created by the treaty had probably been consumed again by the negotiations about it. That's also the strength of the Hofburg Palace as a historical symbol, that this hospitality and the Congress of Vienna, as well as all the other events that preceded it, contributed greatly to solving political problems in Europe." Not only was there a lot of eating at the Congress of Vienna, but there was also a lot of drinking. Zar Alexander of Russia was also in Vienna for the Congress. Zar Alexander was a man who liked to eat and drink. One day, he noticed that the best food and drink was being brought past him by servers, but he couldn't see them on his table. The Tsar went to investigate. He then spied a footman sneaking away some food and drink. He followed the footman, took the stolen food and drink from him, and the next day invited Franz II to breakfast in his chambers and confronted him, something like, "Well, look how much food and drink you've lost, because the servants are thieving like magpies." And Franz commented on this with the words, "Look, Your Majesty, that's how it is with us on a small scale, and with you on a large scale."
Theft from the buffet was probably not uncommon. The monarchs reacted to it with composure. There's a very nice anecdote about Joseph II, the son of Maria Teresa, who once walked through the corridors of the Hofburg Palace and came across a footman who was hiding a fried fish under his coat. When the Kaiser saw the footman's embarrassment, he said to him, "Next time, either wear a longer coat or a shorter fish." There were regular leftovers from these lavish banquets. The court kitchen either donated the food to the poor and sick, or sold them to a nearby inn, or to so-called Schmausfabel women, using the money for a widows' and orphans' fund. They may have been thrifty, but they weren't stingy. Franz was the one who took very drastic measures in terms of court ceremonies and eating habits. He cracked down quite severely on these. For example, he simply cancelled desserts, which were extremely popular in Vienna and at the Viennese court. People ate huge amounts of sweet things. He said it was a luxury and not necessary. It was banned in particular for children. In the evenings, they were no longer allowed to have pastries and sweets, and no more ice cream.
As the allowance for the winter months must not be exceeded, I authorise all of the hereby proposed savings, how they are to be implemented for my son Ferdinand. In addition, dessert, which is more of a luxury item than anything else, must also be suitably restricted. For the Crown Prince, 1 plate of confectionery and baked goods at lunchtime, 1 plate of fruit, coffee, no ice cream in the evenings, 1 plate of biscotti.
So, only 2 plates of sweets per day, a quantity that normal children didn't get in a whole year. When it came to a healthy diet, Emperor Franz adopted the guidelines of his famous grandmother, Kaiserin Maria Teresa. Before the reign of Maria Teresa, it was normal for food to be served all over the place. People ate a wild mix of foods, which often led to stomach upsets. Her personal physician, Van Sweden, whom she had brought in especially to reform and modernize the medical system, had a bright idea: to show her what happens when you eat in such a wild mess. He put a bucket down, and she had to throw a piece of every bit she ate that day into the bucket. After she saw the absurd mix, he said, "Your Majesty, please look in the bucket. This is what it looks like in your stomach now." This example was so drastic that the Kaiserin completely changed her diet. From then on, the royal children also have a lot of vegetables in their meals, which was not met with great enthusiasm at first. Maria Teresa, who followed this very strictly, insisted that her younger children also had to take part in fasting days. This meant even more greens. Instead of lavish platters to serve yourself from at the table, many individual courses were now served in small portions, a major new challenge for court chefs and servers who required precise timing. In terms of lifestyle, Maria Teresa was also influenced by her husband, Franz Stephan, who came from Lorraine and was accustomed to fine French dining culture. He brought all his chefs and court staff from Lorraine to Vienna. So naturally, the French influence also affected the kitchen, not only in cooking style, but also in dish names, like entree, hors d'oeuvre, entremets, and so on.
Each kitchen position had its own name. Some of them have survived to this day, but others have disappeared. There was the chef de cuisine, sous-chef, the chef de garde, who was in charge of the kitchen when it was closed in large hotels. There was a rôtisserie, the roast chef, a saucier, the sauce chef, a légumière, the vegetable chef, and entremetteur, a side dish chef, a commis de cuisine, the rotating chef who changed positions. There was a régimier, the diet chef, the garde manager, the chef for the starters, and a poissonnière, the fish cook.
The fish cook was particularly challenged at the Viennese court, as 150 days of the year were considered to be fast days by the Arch-Catholic Habsburgs, meaning neither meat nor poultry was served. If someone absolutely demanded to eat meat, then it had to be in an adjoining room, not where the large audience was sitting, but somewhere else. It was the same at court, and if Kaiserin Maria Teresa wanted meat on a fasting day, she ate it in her private parlour. The typical fasting dishes were vegetables, various egg dishes, fish dishes, and of course, vegetable-based soups. This was usually a green pea soup. But there would also be pastries, which is why we have this great abundance of pastries in Viennese cuisine. However, pastries was something that Maria Teresa only really looked at. Maria Teresa was very portly in her old age, and it has always been attributed to the fact that she went through so many pregnancies. She had 16 children, and must have eaten excessively, so she became so large. But that wasn't true. The actual reason for her weight was a widespread disease at the time called dropsy, which was caused by water retention on the tissues as a result of heart failure. In fact, the royal ate very little and was content with just plain broth in the evenings. In her childhood, at her father's court, Maria Theresa was served adventurous dishes from the court kitchen. Beaver tails with lemons, squirrel with cauliflower, stuffed swan or roast peacock. The kitchen staff had to show enormous imagination to conjure up such a wide variety on the table. Kaiser Charles VI had 16 courses every day. This was reduced over time, but it shows the variety that the court kitchen was capable of producing. Being a court chef was sometimes a dangerous job. In the Middle Ages, there were severe penalties if a ruler became unwell after a meal. The story of the Viennese Hofburg chef, Stibor Schritzel, who was imprisoned in the Corinthian Tower by the Habsburg Duke Albrecht-II after his family was poisoned by fish, has been told for centuries. The charge was attempted murder by poisoning. When the story turned out to be a plot against the chef, Stibor Schritzel donated the chapel's cross in Vienna's St. Michael's Church in gratitude for his regained freedom. Manners were very rough back then. In the dungeon, in the castle kitchen, and also at the table. Only men were usually seated at the table, and even in imperial dynasties, there was elaborate food but no table manners. This is something that wasn't specific to the Habsburgs, because it was the same throughout Europe, for knights and for aristocrats. Kaiser Charles VI and his wife ate with their fingers because the fork was a taboo utensil. In other words, the church had actually condemned the fork as the devil's tool, saying, "Why use a fork when we have fingers?" Charles VI, who ordered 16 courses, including stuffed swans and beaver tails. The job of a court chef was always extremely demanding, not only because of the extremely demanding dishes, but also because of the tough working conditions. In the roasting kitchen, where 200 chickens were often roasted on a spit over an open fire, it was so hot that the soles of your shoes felt like hot embers. According to the court's records, some of the cooks literally worked themselves to death and collapsed lifeless in the middle of their duties. Pressure to perform, physical agony, and exhaustion drove many chefs to commit suicide up until the 20th century. The 20th century also saw the end of the monarchy. For the last Habsburg on the throne, it was not a time of balls and banquets. He died more often in railway carriages, on the way to a battle, or in a field canteen on the front. Emperor Karl, who was also known as Karl the Sudden, because he was constantly popping up everywhere, was the complete opposite of Kaiser Franz Joseph. With him, everything was always meticulously planned, every journey well prepared. He also never interfered in any processes. This was a huge change and shock for the chefs too. When Kaiser Karl traveled to inspect troops or went to the front lines in the court train, he always turned up in the court chef's carriage and drove the chefs crazy. Tinned vegetables instead of roast venison, and the goulash of the Austro-Hungarian army was reduced to only a thin potato soup, even for the last Kaiser. One of the biggest problems during the First World War was the supply situation. The famine, which prevailed from 1917 to 1918. This was actually the biggest issue and the biggest challenge for the monarchy. In the end, it decided the public battle between the monarchy and the republic. It tipped the balance towards the republic, as people had more confidence that a republican government with representatives from the people would be able to get this huge issue under control. When Kaiser Karl and Kaiserin Zita left for exile, court chef Rudolph Munch prepared a modest farewell meal at their first place of refuge in Eckhartsau Castle. Rudolph Munch lived until 1934 and had to work in a small company buffet as he lacked a sufficient pension. Otto de Balms, who had cooked for the most powerful Kaisers, ended up working for a delicatessen after the First World War and died in 1925. Karl Kenberg, who had lived through 3 Kaisers, did not live to witness the end of the monarchy. He passed away in 1902 at the age of almost 80. Teresa Teufel, who lived in the Amalienburg for a long time, reached the proud age of 90. She lived in Vienna until 1930. Habsburg chefs. Many of their thousands of recipes have survived. Some are still very popular.
Viennese cuisine is actually a melting pot of the different countries of the former empire. That's what makes it special. It is the only cuisine named after a capital city. There is no Parisian cuisine, no Roman cuisine, no New York cuisine, and no Tokyo cuisine. This is what has earned it its international reputation.